All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our panel discussion on building adaptive and resilient organizations. I'm just going to make sure that whoever else joins doesn't have to sit in the waiting room. Give it just a minute. All right. We're going to go ahead and get started, and hopefully some more people will join us as we go along. So again, thank you for joining us today for building adaptive and resilient organizations. This discussion is hosted jointly by Loyola's Risk Management and Insurance Center and the Executive and Professional Education Center, which are both part of the Business Leadership Hub housed in Quinlan School of Business. My name is Kayla Gustafson, and I am the Program Manager for EPIC, and pleased to be here with you today. I am joined with a wonderful panel of experts on this topic, and we will introduce them in just a minute. But before we begin, I want to go over a few house rules. Our discussion is going to begin with a few remarks from each panelist. During that time, you can go ahead and leave your camera off if you'd like. They'll have presentations. Please do keep yourself muted during the presentations. We will, around 1 o'clock, have some time for questions and answers. So based on the questions that you submitted when you registered for the program, we'll go through a few of those, and then we'll also open it up for any questions that you might have that have come up throughout the presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the Executive Director of the Business Leadership Hub, Abel Jalaband.
Thank you, Kayla. I appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. It is a fall day. It was supposed to be sunny, but I think at least on my side of the city, it is raining. So I wanted to welcome you, and I wanted to thank Kayla for doing an extraordinary job in terms of putting this program together. We would not have been able to gather everybody to do so. My name is Abel Jalaband. I'm a professor of finance and executive director of the Leadership Hub at the Quinlan School of Business. I have been with the business school for, I guess it is going to 17 years. And I had the privilege of being the former dean of the School of Business. And I can assure you that we have a fantastic program focusing on how we can make corporations more adaptable in terms of dealing with change. So let me just share with you my slides, and then we can move forward with that. Okay, can everybody see that? Perfect, perfect. So in case that you're wondering what is Business Leadership Hub, so I just thought have one slide, kind of a sales job, and then just we move to the substance of the program. The Business Leadership Hub is really an umbrella organization of a number of key centers in the Quinlan School of Business. We have several centers: Social Enterprise and Responsibility, Family Business Center, Supply Chain and Sustainability, Risk Management and Insurance. We have an Executive Education and program, and also we have student-run businesses. And these are really Loyola students who are running actual companies, and they have P&L actually responsibility, and we provide them with that experiential opportunity. And also we have a new center, Artificial Intelligence and Business Consortium. And what we are really trying to do with the Business Leadership Hub is to communicate the experience, both professional and academic experience of our faculty to the industry, and trying to address the challenges that they have. And in the meantime, we like to learn from them and bring that learning into our curriculum. We have already done several initiatives based on what we learned from the industry, and those have basically manifested in terms of new certificate programs, internship programs, and minors and majors, and we hope that we can continue to do so. Let me just move forward with introducing our hold on a sec. Our speakers. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to start with Erik Heuser. Erik is Executive Vice President and Corporate Chief Operation Officer at Taylor Morrison Incorporated. Taylor Morrison is, I believe, it is the 5th largest real estate company in the United States, and in that respect, it has a huge impact in the real estate market, and more directly as it moves to other areas of operations. He has had wide-ranging responsibilities in that company, including leading strategic directions and business development initiatives, managing the portfolio and evaluation of all contemplated investments and divestitures, strategic marketing, and sales. Prior to joining Taylor Morrison, Erik held key positions in Hanley Wood Market Intelligence, Vice President of Acquisition for PNC Financial Services Group, Senior Acquisition and Portfolio Management at Metropolitan Life Institution Finance and AG Edwards & Son. He holds both a bachelor and an MBA degree from Illinois State University. He has also participated in a number of leadership programs offered by Harvard, Wharton, University of Chicago, Pepperdine, and Kellogg. He serves on the Emeritus Council Board of the Foundation for Senior Living, and also is a member of the board of the Center for Risk Management and Insurance at Loyola Business Leadership Hub. Our second speaker, Renee Czeryba, is a Senior Director of Change Management at Cushman and Wakefield, which is a leading global real estate service which is operating in 60 different countries. Renee has been involved with Fortune 500 organizations such as Mercer and Walgreens, leading major change and transformation projects. Her professional expertise are very apropos to what we're talking today, because she's focusing on the human impact of bringing change and designing strategies and plan to support employees through the change and the journey that a company is going through in order to implement those things. Her work has been expanded to over 40 different countries, and she's also sort of connecting the change management with the overall risk management approach in the organization. Actually, Renee is an alumna of Loyola, and thank you for that, Renee. She has earned a Bachelor's of Science degree from Loyola University in Psychology and Philosophy, and a Master of Science degree in Personnel and Human Resources from the Illinois Institute of Technology. She serves on the board of the Center for Risk Management and Insurance at the Loyola Business Leadership Hub. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panel. As Kayla mentioned, the idea would be that I will have a short presentation setting the stage for our experts to bring more relevant and sort of an operational definition for what change management and adaptability is all about. Following that, Erik will focus on how change management is being implemented at Taylor Morrison and some of the challenges, both macro and micro, that he has experienced. And Renee is probably most experienced than all of us in terms of how actually change management can be brought forward within organization of diverse backgrounds. So that's why we put her last, so that she can wrap it up for us as we move forward. All right, so let me start with basically my presentation, which is really setting the stage. So I think when we're talking about leadership, the most important dimension of leadership is coping with change. And really, when we're talking about managing change, we are talking about a corporation or an organization to be adaptable. And in order to be adaptable, you really have to do 5 different things very well. You have to set a direction. What does that change essentially affect in terms of your direction? You have to formulate strategies. You have to make sure that there's buy-in within the organization, and you have to accept the realities that the change ensues in terms of your organization. And ultimately, you have to create organizational and societal value. But having said that, being adaptable to change has been a challenge for many corporations, for many organizations. And the inability to respond to managing change and being adaptable has really been costly in terms of economic growth, either at the national level or in a global level. So let's just start with what is the definition of organizational adaptability? At least this is the academic definition of it. I'm sure that both Renee and Erik will have much more focused definition. I think when we're talking about managing change or being adaptable, or how corporations, organizations succeed, we have advanced two particular views. One is a static view, and the other one is a dynamic view. Under the static view, essentially we are saying that competitive advantages can be created by things such as barriers to entry, intellectual property, economies of scale, and size of the company. However, under the dynamic view, we believe that sources of competitive advantage, actually, they are coming from management adaptation to an uncertain environment, which essentially requires flexibility, requires speed, and requires tools in order to bring adaptability forward. And I saw that quote that really reflects what this dynamic view represents, and which is saying that we need a shift in management philosophy. Large-scale global organizations, such as the one that, for example, in Taylor Madison, they have to operate with a startup mindset. In other words, they are not really immune in terms of the realities of the market and the changes that we are experiencing. So there is this startup mindset, which is very important. Now, as I was thinking about adaptability, I thought, is this a new idea? And so I saw a quote actually from a book on the origin of the species by Charles Darwin in 1853. And I think that quote really reflects what we're talking about. It is not the strongest of the species, to think about barriers to entry, size, that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one that is most responsive to change. And I think adaptability, therefore, it has a historical definition as well. So it's really not a new concept. I wanted to focus on what separates failure from success. I have listed a bunch of organizations, venerable organizations. I think we are all familiar with those that they showed up with tremendous amount of strengths and then disappeared from the S&P 500 list. And some of those organizations are still going through ongoing challenges, like US Postal Services that didn't think that people communicate through internet. Wells Fargo, that it has fundamental problems in terms of the governance mechanisms in that bank. Facebook and Netflix. I think Netflix stock has significantly gone down because I guess they didn't realize that there will be competition in the streaming field. So if you look at these firms, I think one thing that we can learn is that their predicament is not because there were disruptive innovations in the market that they did not actually predict. I think it was because they had a retarded strategy in terms of adapting. And one example that really comes close is Kodak. Kodak was this venerable company. Everybody around the world knew that. I remember, I am from Iran, so Kodak was a complete known name even in Iran. They sort of felt that digital photography is never going to take off, although they had a complete scientific capability to adapt their basically technology to that. And Kodak disappeared, although they're coming back at a much smaller size. So when we're talking about change, really we're talking about risks. So risks actually bring change. So there is a think tank called World Economic Forum that essentially surveys about close to 10,000 individuals in government, in public and private corporations with different titles of CEOs, CROs, and they basically identify what are the top risks that we are facing over the next decade, both in the short term and in the long run. So I looked at their most recent report, 2022, and basically two slides that they had really caught my attention. This slide asks, how do you feel about the outlook for the world? And roughly over 80% are quite concerned. And about 15+%, they think that they have a positive view about where the world is going. So the question is that, where is that 80+% concern and worriness comes from? I don't think it is coming from fear of disruptive innovation. I think that it is coming from not knowing how to deal and how to manage the change that these disruptions could produce. I was reading Wall Street Journal today, and it seems that major corporations in the United States have significantly reduced their capital expenditures and also investment in innovation. And I think that this is exactly the time that they should do the reverse, not really start bringing it down. And I'm sure that Erik will talk about the recent activities of the Fed. I think I am also quite concerned about the hawkish approach of the Fed. I think it would be more damaging than benefiting in terms of removing inflation. So this survey also identified the most severe risks over the next decade. And as you could see that there were basically 5 categories of risk: economic, environmental, geopolitical, societal, and technological. So as you could see that the top, I would say the top risks essentially, they hover around environmental and societal risks. And it's interesting that debt crisis really was the 9th risk, and geoeconomic confrontation, which is by now we are used to basically what is going on in Ukraine, is basically the last risk. And I think that if the risks that we are experiencing are heavily rooted in environmental and societal risks, I think that also tells me that there are limitations about what the Federal Reserve can do in terms of dealing with inflation, because these risks are quite different from the tools that the Federal Reserve has in terms of addressing the economic challenges that we are facing. So when we talk about adaptability, it is not a panacea. It doesn't really say that every time that there's a change in the horizon, the company has to move forward and try to adapt to it. There are costs and benefits associated with adaptability. Adaptability essentially says find an appropriate and optimal portfolio of investing in your core assets, as well as in assets that they reflect basically change. So adaptability is an optimal position in that two dimensions. If we focus basically too much on new areas, that basically entails significant adjustment and opportunity cost. On the other hand, if we are not adaptive to changes, we're going to be left out. And I think that's so the question is that there are costs and benefits, and every organization has to decide where you want to be in terms of that portfolio of costs and benefits associated with adaptability. I want to show you this graph. Please bear with me because I got to explain what it is. A couple of years ago, a colleague of mine, Dr. Sungmin Kim, who is the chair of management department at Quinlan School of Business, and we published a paper which focused on new perspectives on corporate adaptability. And in preparation for this meeting, I went ahead and expanded our data sets and sort of provided this two-dimensional chart for you. On the basically vertical axis, we are looking at capital expenditure divided by total asset by several industries, as you could see. Information technology, semiconductors, communication, pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, software, electronics, food and beverage, and energy. And on the horizontal axis, we are looking at the ratio, which is called research and development intensity, R&D intensity, which is the ratio of research and development expenditure divided by total asset. And then you see basically 3 colors in here. You see light orange, you see green, and you see dark orange. So the light orange companies, each company is represented by a ratio. The numerator is the rate of return on total asset, and the denominator is the riskiness of that industry measured in various forms. So the ratio of rate of return on risk essentially is an indication whether the industry is doing well or it's not doing well. So if you look at the companies that, or the industries that they are represented by light orange, these are the companies or industries that they have established at the right proportion of where you want to be in terms of your growth opportunities or the ability to respond and be adaptable to change, and also your core assets. And the ones that they are basically, they have a green shade and dark orange are the ones that they are very unidimensional, focusing mostly on their basically capital expenditures. This next slide shows that the light orange ones are the one that, in terms of the ratio of rate of return on risk, outperforming the other industries. And these are the companies that they have basically found a mechanism to establish an optimal portfolio between how to respond to change in terms of new opportunities and at the same time be respectful of their core assets. So I'm going to basically end with something that everybody probably is wondering. And what are the steps that an organization should take in order to develop and implement an adaptability system? I took that table from some of my consultings in the area of risk management, which is very much relevant to the area of adaptability. So there are basically 6 steps that every company has to take, every organization has to take in order to move toward developing and implementing an adaptability system. The first thing is that to identify who are the adaptability leaders, who are the leaderships that basically driving this process. The second stage is that when it comes to change and response to change, people have differences of opinion. So it is very important to bring a sort of a level playing field among the organization about what are the changes and why it is important to address those changes. The next step would be to determine the adaptability profile of your company. And that really hinges on 5 different areas. And there are tools and mechanisms that I would not go through in order to identify them. You have to define what is the adaptability culture of your organization. Does the organization recognize adaptive opportunities and consequences of that? Is there an administration that manages adaptive behavior? Just like, for example, for risk management, you have a chief risk officer. Do you have a chief adaptability officer? And that, I'm not quite sure that exists, but I wouldn't be surprised that, we might actually have that. Maybe Renee is going to be a chief adaptability officer. Who knows? And also, what does your board know about adaptability? I find that boards in general are not very well equipped with these concepts. And also, what are the internal adaptability control that you have within your organization that allows you to move for that, so that you're looking at the residual part of that? And when we talk about change or adaptability, we need to find what is the probability of a change occurring. What is the impact of that change on the overall activities of the organization? And what is the existing level of control? It is only in that fashion that we can choose which one to take and which one not to take. And then develop implementation and continuously review this process. So these are the 5 steps. For those of you who might be interested about more detail of how actually we go ahead to put these steps together, I'll be happy to talk to you, just separately and walk you through some of the tools and mechanisms on those things. So I end with the fact that, with the caveat that adaptability is a balancing act. It's not a panacea. It doesn't mean that if you are operating in an industry that your outcomes and your audiences and your market is relatively predictable. So you may be better off to focus more significantly on your core assets. On the other hand, if you happen to be an industry which is exposed to uncertainty and rapidly changing environment, as is true in an increasing number of industries today, you need a dynamic and sustainable way to stay ahead. And your survival actually may depend on it. So I'm going to stop at this point, and I'm going to ask Erik to lead us next.
Great. Thank you, Kayla and Abel, for the kind introduction. Really honored to be with you here today. Let me see if I can pull up the screen successfully here. Okay. Yeah, and maybe just a couple relevant kind of bridges to some of your comments, Abel. You know, wholly subscribe to the concept and the benefit and the return on investment for pursuit. And hopefully we'll share with you a little bit about the home building industry, not to make anybody a pseudo expert of the space, but just to share that it's highly cyclical. It's highly influenced by things around us that we cannot control. And because of that, maybe some of the structural elements that we employ, and maybe a couple good examples of things that we've done to address those issues. And so, you know, I often use the example of Blockbuster. I do believe at some point in time, Blockbuster had the opportunity to buy Netflix for some relatively nominal amount, $50 million or so, and they completely ignored it. So who knows, you know, maybe we would have a Blockbuster as an app still or on our TVs as something to plug into, but we don't because of a decision that was made. I also love a great quote. It was a prior CEO of Ford, I think, and he said, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance less. And so that's, again, something that I like to share with folks around the organization who, you know, for many people, change is hard. And a lot of the things I'm going to share are around kind of deep engagement with our board, leadership, structural elements. How do you turn information into knowledge, into decision-making, and ultimately into action? And I can tell you for a fact that action and execution are absolutely the most difficult things. And so glad that Renee's here, and it'll be a good transition as we talk about some of these elements and some of the things that Renee can share. So from a content standpoint, again, no real intent to share too deeply about home building, but just to share that it is a very influenced business, and we need to be very adaptive. Share just a little bit about our evolution because it is significant. When I joined the company in 2004, I believe we were the 22nd largest residential home builder in the United States. And as Abel shared, we're number 5 today, and that's come through a lot of work and hopefully good calls on the market and strategic decisions. And it requires a DNA that really is accommodating to those conversations. And then again, hopefully a couple good examples of being adaptive and resilient. So, you know, housing is actually pretty relevant to the overall economy. We do have the opportunity to engage with the Fed, usually at least once a year, and that meeting is coming up here in a few weeks. And, you know, it's really a conversation because there is a bit of a trickle-down effect. If the Fed raises rates, that will have a correlation to mortgage rates. And if it influences the home building sector, it means that we will be selling less homes. And therefore we will be buying less stuff, being toilets and all the things that go into homes. And that has a trickle down effect to the building product manufacturers, to you know, Home Depot and Lowe's and a lot of other things. So we are a little bit of the tip of the spear, or said differently, a little bit of a lead target for the Fed because of that trickle down effect. Because again, housing is a material component of GDP. To the right, just wanted to share a little bit about volatility. And I think that's a key element as we think about how do you address a fast changing market. As a stock, you know, we do have a high beta because we are relatively volatile. And again, there's a lot of things outside of our control that influence our operations and ultimately our outcomes that result in stock share price. So you'll see, and those of you who remember, you know, some of the volatility and the run up and the meltdown that resulted in kind of 2007 and 8, new home sales were significantly impacted by that as a lead up because of some of the speculation in markets that started with Wall Street, went to mortgage, went to home builders, went to, you know, your neighbors probably owning 4 or 5 homes. And it just was not good and led to a significant decrease. And because of that, you know, you see a huge buildup in volume and then a huge decrease in gap. And then on the bottom here, bottom right, we got a chart here that shows just the annual volatility of sales. So outside of big systemic economic changes, I would tell you that our levels of the business are relatively volatile year to year because of things outside of our control. And we'll share a little bit more about those things. I would say the last few years, though, have been great. Our margins as an industry have been very, very high relative to historic norms. And that's because, call it COVID, because people wanted new homes that were clean and fresh. And to some extent, people could live out in places that were different because they thought they could telecommute for long periods of time. And just, generally a demand supply disconnect. We were benefiting from way more demand than we could supply. And that resulted in high gross margins. To the right here, we've got kind of, as we think about when to be worried, if you go way back in time, historic housing cycles move typically kind of 4 or 5 years would be average. In the run up, starting in kind of 1990 all the way through the financial meltdown, that was a 15-year run. And then kind of a very, very steep cliff drop, and then working our way back up to another pretty sustained and long growth plane. And so, we do get a little worried when you start getting beyond those 5 to 6 years to do all the scenarios. What if, and really start having those deep conversations around risk and opportunity. I'm sure nobody is immune to this, and certainly in our markets, which I'll share a little bit about more. Affordability is a real challenge, and kind of when we engage with folks, being the Fed and others, in terms of how can we build a more affordable house, I would just tell you it's getting more difficult because of regulations. Number one, in California, for example, it's really hard to even start talking about building a house until you're $200,000 into permits and fees and such. And the average cost of our kind of house before any margin is about $450,000. And so, we do own the obligation of trying to create an affordable house. But again, given the demand supply disconnects, as well as some of the factors that go into building a house, has just become really, really difficult. And so you'll see that affordability just in the last couple of years has diminished significantly for the Mr. and Mrs. Smiths of the world. And that pool of buyers is just going to get smaller and smaller. And we'll talk a little bit more around why. One of them is mortgage rates, and a lot of numbers here, so I apologize. But maybe if we just gravitate to the bottom side of this part of this slide, you'll see currently, and this is already dated, mortgage rates are more than 6.77%. And the median price is also a little bit more than 437. But really, to go back in time to gravitate to a more normalized affordability structure, you really would need one of two things to happen: either mortgage rates to come all the way down to 3.45%, or to have a significant decrease in the house price back down to something around $300,000. And so as you think about, what are the prospects of interest rates as folks contemplate their income and what truly they can afford, these are the type of math equations that not only we do, but each one of our customers needs to do. And it's why, again, affordability has created such a constraint in the industry. So some of those things are kind of depressing, but let me pivot to something that might be a little bit more kind of opportunistic or exciting. Our active adult buyers, we have an active adult brand that's called Esplanade, and we're a very successful builder in the active adult market in Florida, for example, where we build large scale master plan communities dedicated to serving the lifestyles of boomers. And as you all know, boomers are a significantly large demographic, and really the prime moving from kind of age 62 to 68. So, really when folks move from one stage of life to another, whether it's coming from school, living with parents, getting married, having kids, that normal evolution, those are the triggers that usually create a desire to move in a different home. And so that's where we get excited about not only the boomers resulting in an age of wanting to retire and maybe move to sunshine states, but also the scale of the millennials and the Gen Zs, the millennials at 80 some million, and as I understand the Gen Zs about 90 million plus. These are big populations of folks working their way through the housing ecosystem. If you, one of the slides I had previously, we as an entire industry across the entire country build only about 1.5 million widgets a year. And that includes multifamily as well as custom homes. And so really, we home builders only produce, call it 800,000 or 900,000 of these things. So as you think about 80 million people, 90 million people coming through the system, we do think there's a really strong demographic backdrop to bolster the industry. And again, those are kind of the things that we try to read the tea leaves about strategically, initiative-wise, managing change, being agile, really engaging with our customers. A famous line I have, probably annoyingly, walking around the office when people ask me what to do is, don't ask me, ask the customer. These are the people that we need to ask what we need to do about our future strategies in terms of product and location and focus. Again, maybe part of the good news about sustaining a downturn is that it's generally believed that we are still underbuilt. So as you think about that massive run up in supply, a massive fall down in the ability to build homes and supply, and our kind of trudging upward, we are still probably systemically undersupplied by 1.5 to 2 million units across the United States. And as you think about those huge demographic swaths coming through, those are what are going to be interesting about, again, influencing our strategy and our desire to be agile about making sure that we're talking to our customers and adapting correctly. Just a minute on our legacy. Our legacy goes back to the UK. We had two legacy companies that merged in 2007, but both companies were founded in the late 1800s, responsible for all kinds of differentiated things like lead project management of the channel. Ultimately came over here to the United States and Canada, building homes and communities. So we've got a really strong and proud legacy around these companies that came together. Our current operations, again, this is intentional. Unfortunately, we were in Chicago at one point in time. I had to strategically, and happy to share some of the reasons why, but we did shut that division down. And we are really focused on, we call it kind of the smiley face of the United States. So if you look at migration rates relative to demographics, we do think we're well positioned in these 19 markets. Current operations, we build lots of different homes, entry level all the way up to luxury. We build very large scale master plans across the country. And some of the things that we're really proud of, and I think this goes to the cultural elements that are so important in terms of having a resilient company that can withstand, 130, 140 years and can adapt. Is culturally, we really focus on doing the right things, and we've been fortunate enough to win the Most Trusted Builder award for the last 7 years. We have a relationship with the National Wildlife Federation that is exclusive. We're very focused on the future constraint of folks entering the housing industry by being a lead in the Building Talent Foundation, very focused on gender equality, and diversification of our workforce, jumped into the Fortune 500, humanitarian awards, very engaged in homemade. So we like to do the right things because it feels good. It's the right thing to do. And I think it encourages the type of folks that culturally can adapt. In terms of threats in housing, low barriers to entry. I owned a home builder when I lived in Chicago, and it was not very difficult to set up. Believe it or not, there's only about 18 public builders in the United States, but I looked it up and I guess there's 434,000 home builders. So think of all the folks with pickup trucks buying, building 1 or 2 homes a year. There's a lot of competition out there, very cyclical. interest rates, as we talked about, really drive the demand side of our business. Confidence. I mean, why would you buy a new home if you thought you were going to lose your job? Confidence is absolutely a critical factor. The economy, employment factors. We talked about demographics and regulations. But I would tell you, once you scale, it's a very highly capital intensive business. As you think about, again, the cost of one of our widgets, every single one of them costs us about $450,000. And so you do have to have a strong capital structure to be able to get there. As we evolve through this cycle, I'll talk a little bit about some of the defense in terms of managing that capital intensity. On the opportunity side, as we think about being agile and adaptive and resilient, as you grow, you do have to have a strong capital structure. So we did enter the IPO markets. We led an IPO in 2013. It was the largest home builder IPO in history. So very proud of that. And we've also grown significantly through M&A and market share. So a lot of the benefits of scale really come through local market share. So the ability to buy land less, the ability to negotiate with trades, the ability to have a consumer that recognizes you as, those are all the little things that kind of add to the benefits of having significant market share. We'll talk a little bit about ERM and ESG that we think are really important. And then strategic pivots. We'll talk a little bit about geography, consumer, business model pivot. Building science is, I will humbly offer that by and large, the industry builds a home like we did 40 years ago. So the opportunity to really pursue efficiencies so that we can deliver more affordable housing, I think is really something we need to pay attention to, and probably will be, as we think about being agile and resilient in the future, one of the key elements. I think you can address being agile by way of your organization structure. It communicates efficiency. It communicates getting things done in a non-bureaucratic way, bolstering the balance sheet, and then just having an agile mindset. Really, really looking for folks that are excited about understanding key insights, making bold decisions, and willing and able to execute change. And I think that cultural mindset is of the most important elements. A lot of words here, won't walk through too much of it, but did want to share just kind of our evolution, because it's important as we scaled. We did an IPO in 2013. We started our first acquisition in 2013. And we had a very significant focus on move-up consumers. 67% of our buyers were move-up. Unfortunately, through bold decisions, we decided to sell. A very significant part of our business was Canadian. So kind of very deeply engaged in that decision and that execution. We continued to buy companies year by year. We entered the build to rent space, and that's one that I will come back to because I think it's important. Continued buying public companies, entered kind of that number 5 position. We sold our Chicago operations, most trusted builder, entered the Fortune 500, and a very more balanced kind of consumer positioning as you think about entry level, move up, and resort style. And I think that diversification is really important to withstand changes in the environment that we talked about. M&A, an important part of our growth prospect. Again, there's really only 18 public builders, and so those are kind of the big ones that are able to grow significantly through M&A. And that acquisition strategy kind of bounces up and down through the years as you think about good and bad times to use valuation to pursue acquisition. You'll see, albeit only about 18 public builders, we do own 43 or so % of market share. And so as you think about those 400,000 or so home builders that are very, very tiny, it's an interesting, highly fragmented industry that scale really can matter. We do believe there's benefit in diversifying by price point, and you'll see of the leading builders taking different positions. Toll Brothers, by way of example, very intentionally has the highest price point. And kind of they're known as the luxury builder in the space. And you see some on the other end of the spectrum, LGI and DR Horton, for example, that take a very mindful approach to more entry level. We by and large very much focus on core locations, and those core locations means expensive land and usually a higher price point. So our average price point is $621,000. And then geographically, as you think strategically, where are we going to place our chips on the United States and in different markets and submarkets? You'll see builders take different approaches. So all to say, as you think about being strategic and addressing kind of long-term resilience, there are different positions to play within the industry. I would tell you that we are very focused on ESG. We started our first report a few years ago, and I would humbly tell you it's still early days for us. There's a lot to learn and a lot of good work to do, but we do want to be a leader in ESG. And, we're very focused on kind of carbon footprint. We've got a great report. As you think about the S, maybe I'll focus here in the middle in terms of sustainability. A lot of things that go into our house are healthy. We're very focused at certified wildlife habitat, making sure we're dedicating enough space to the environment. Energy Star and redeveloping sites, I think, is also a way that we can contribute to not just going out to green pastures and developing new spaces, but how can we be creative at building on spaces that have been used before. From a governance standpoint, a lot of different ways to think about governance. I would just tell you that we're very focused on diversity of our employees because we think there's a genuine benefit in terms of race and gender and even age. I would tell you we're probably not where we want to be at this stage, but really measurement and awareness are the first steps. And so I think that embedded part of our culture really leads a lot of people to us. And I really see that through external lenses as folks sometimes maybe leave the company and come back and say, well, the pasture wasn't greener. Or, you have people with fresh eyes come in and say, wow, you guys really are different. Unfortunately, I don't have that lens since I've been with the company since 2004. But it's great to hear and see. And we've got a very, strong culture that's focused on the things on the bottom. We have daily huddles across the organization. I would just offer one thing relative to executing change. As we worked our way through COVID, that daily huddle was imperative, as every team member across the company was responsible for leading or engaging in a daily huddle. It's only 10 to 15 minutes in terms of a cultural element of the company. What's an important battle of the day? What do I need help with? And so fortunately, we started that before COVID. It really helped us get through COVID, and it's a cultural element that people really enjoy and get people engaged on a daily basis.
Erik, hate to interrupt, but if you could wrap up for us, just to stay on time. Thanks.
No, I appreciate it, Kayla. The build to rent, I'll just say 30 seconds on this. This was an intentional pivot. We've never built a rental home, but this is a way of really chasing an entirely new segment, somebody that we wouldn't have historically been able to talk with and build a completely different product. And it's not traditional garden style apartments. It is horizontal apartments. So it's single family living in a dedicated community with an amenity that behaves on an investment standpoint more like a multifamily experience. And so really every renter gets a backyard. And so really an agile adaptation, I would suggest, for the company as we think about growth prospects going forward. I mentioned how do we work through poor times or challenging times, really strong balance sheet. And so you'll see as an industry, we've done a nice job of preparing for a tough time because all of the debt is very extended out in longer periods of time. And then ERM and ROE, we are very return focused. We think that's the right long-term answer to drive success through a cycle. In ERM structurally, Abel, really enjoyed your commentary in terms of how do you build, the steps. And I would tell you, ERM is a process that we have that really helps with kind of the recognition and administration and governance relative to key decisions in managing risk through a cycle. So with that, I will pause and yield to Renee. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Eric. Those stats were fascinating. Thanks for sharing all of that. And, just building a little bit on, what you were saying about, adaptable organizations and needing to transform. I mean, I'll share here in a second. I was at Sears for a little while before I moved over to Walgreens, and Sears was essentially, back in the catalog days, what Amazon is today. They would produce a catalog, they would deliver it to the home, you'd order the items, they'd be shipped to your home. And they're irrelevant now, essentially, right? They were the #1 brand for tools. They didn't necessarily adapt. When I actually joined Sears back in 2010, I was there as the change lead to roll out their Shop Your Way Rewards loyalty program, which at the time, at the peak, had like 65 million members. And they were kind of the poster child of what a good loyalty program looks like. You go to Starbucks, you scan your rewards number and you get points and you get a free coffee, whatever it is. But Sears was kind of one of the pioneers of loyalty programs. And they just didn't stay relevant, didn't adapt, had a hard time changing, and we know where Sears is today. But with that, let me just quickly pull up my presentation here. Thank you everyone for having me. As Abul already mentioned, proud Loyola Rambler grad, super proud of my Loyola roots. And also Illinois Institute of Technology. I've been in the Chicagoland area my entire life. As I mentioned, started in Mercer as a consultant in like that talent management space. Then I moved over to Sears. And between Mercer and Sears, I'm also a mom. I have 3 teenagers in the home. So I took several years off between Mercer and Sears. Then I went over to Walgreens, where I was in 3 different roles there. My first 3 years at Walgreens, I was in the change management function, first external hire, building the change management center of excellence for all of Walgreens, worked on several different transformations, whether it was HR transformation, facilities transformation, a lot of different transformations. And then after my change work at Walgreens, I moved over to the operations space, where I was managing 100 million plus P&L for repair and maintenance for the stores, for HVAC, refrigeration, lighting, signage, drive-throughs, plumbing, parking lots, kind of fell under my remit so the OpEx and CapEx there as well. And after my time in operations, I moved over into a global procurement transformation role also when Walgreens merged with Boots Alliance in the UK and globally worked on some of the transformational initiatives in the procurement function. And then currently I'm at Cushman Wakefield, but I think one thread that carries me throughout my entire career is just understanding that change and adaptability lens. And as Abul mentioned earlier, is really focusing on the people side of change. So even when I was managing all the repair and maintenance work, which is extremely operational, light is either on or it's off, putting on that people lens and understanding, what does this mean to the stores? What does this mean to the vendors? What's the impact on people with any kind of change that we're implementing? I'm going to quickly go through the company
Renee,
over. Yes.
Can you just put your presentation in presentation mode for us?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. Cushman and Wakefield, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. You guys can go to our website. We operate in 60 different countries, have approximately 400 offices, 50,000 employees. Some of our values, we're inclusive, we succeed together, we deliver insight, and we make an impact. A majority of our offices are in the Americas, where we have 35,000 employees. We have offices in EMEA as well, along with APAC. In terms of what do we do, right? You think about, it's not just commercial real estate, but it's also the repair and maintenance and facility administration, project development, working in, every kind of industry you can imagine, supporting our clients through their whatever needs they have. award-winning organization. I think the one that I'll just highlight here that I'm most proud of is winning the 2022 Brandon Hall Group Gold Award for Change and Transformation from the Brandon Hall Group globally, which is a big win for us. It was for a change transformation I led last year, moving 12,000 employees from one payroll system to another. Obviously, when you think about change and what's important, obviously, one of these where people need to make sure they get paid so they can pay their rent and pay their bills and things like that. But the kind of change approach that was used there and the leadership engagement and the buy-in to help drive it was really what differentiated that initiative for maybe, sometimes people think, well, it's a change management project, just send an email and people will adapt and adopt. But that's, in all my years of practicing change management and leading change, that's not the case. So going into, what comes to mind when you think of the words adaptable and resilient, and why does your organization, continue to need to change? I think the pandemic just accelerated the need for change. I mean, there were tons of examples we just had around Polaroid and Kodak and Sears and everyone else, but you need to stay relevant, right? We're competing globally. There's just a continuous need to move and think. I always say you want to be 2 steps ahead of your competitors if you can be. What comes to mind when I think about being adaptable and resilient is organizations that are open to change, a place where you don't necessarily say, well, we've always done it this way, so we're going to keep doing it. We've always done it this way doesn't work for us anymore. I think another big factor that comes to mind when I think about how to build adaptable and resilient organizations is, creating those feedback loops. So whenever I'm rolling out a transformation or a change initiative or thinking about like what works or what doesn't work is, how are we getting feedback? I think a little bit, Erik, you touched on this around, ask the customer what they want, right? So even when you're working internally, I look at my customers as, my operations counterparts, my procurement counterparts, my HR counterparts, whoever it may be, is, what do they need? What are some of the barriers? How can we, as we think about change, make, that employee experience better? Another factor that I think about is like just being willing and open to accept that others can have a different idea. So creating that kind of culture of trust. I already talked a little bit about like removing that we've always done it this way language, and then moving quickly past failures, and then having employees be part of the solution. So I'm sure we've all experienced when something is done to you versus something that's done with you, right? And who best to know kind of what your customers want or what needs to happen are other than, your employees on your front line. And I do this by creating either influencer networks, so identifying individuals in the organization who can help drive the change, or change agent networks, whatever you may think of, but using them to help build the solution, help them influence others as well, especially in big organizations, but even in small organizations, and having employees be part of the solution. And then part of that feedback loop is modifying your approach based on lessons learned and feedback received, right? If there's one thing that I emphasize to my team, to the organization as a change leader, is that we need to course correct. If something's not working and we learn something that might be working better, we need to quickly adapt and course correct based on what we're learning if it's not working, and not be afraid to say, what, this didn't work. We've enhanced it. We've found better ways of doing it, and we're going to roll out a different version or whatever it may be. And then I always say change management, adaptability, resiliency, it starts at the top, right? The leader sets the tone, always, always, always. So as you're thinking about trying to build more of that, like adaptability, resiliency, change in your organization, meet with the executive leadership team. Where's their head at? Where are they thinking that the biggest, transformational needs are in the organization? A lot of times organizations, will have 50, 60 different initiatives that they want to tackle, different groups working in their different areas, and they say, we need to do this, we need to do that. It's, prioritizing those initiatives. There's no way that, you can get through everything effectively and successfully. So it's really thinking about, what are those priorities for us for the year, for the next 3 years, for the next 5 years that are going to help us move the needle. And, cascade the need for change throughout the leadership teams, and then cascade that information to all employees too. I'll talk a little bit about that too, in terms of, how you can do that. One way is to, incorporate adaptability, resiliency language, change language into strategic objectives, and building those strategic objectives into what employees do day to day. I mean, how many times have we been part of projects or initiatives where you're like, well, I need to do that, but I'm not sure, how does that connect to the organization? How does that connect to my clients? So really like tying everything back to those strategic objectives. Give employees a sense of purpose, helping them understand that what they do is important. How does it contribute to the greater good? I can't emphasize this enough, but explain the why, right? Why do we need to do this? What happens if we don't do this? What's at risk? What's at risk to me as an employee? What's at risk to my organization? What's at risk to my clients if we don't change and adapt? Thinking through, a lot of intelligent automation work that's coming through in different ways. So just, helping people understand that story, explaining what's in it for me, how's this going to help me in my day-to-day. And then I always like to emphasize this point when I'm working with the organization and leaders is, what's the risk in not changing? So if we don't do this, what is going to happen? What is the impact to our organization? So, these are just some things that you can keep in mind as you're trying to build that engagement and trying to build that leadership alignment in the organization, is like helping tell that story of what happens if we don't do this. Working on several different initiatives and projects right now, and, coming close to year end, and I always, there's so much happening at the year end, and I'm, laying out kind of the timeline of activities and events and what's happening in the organization from a change standpoint. I say, okay, yes, we're supposed to go live on this initiative on January 9th, but we also have year-end reviews that are due, and DEI training that's due, and a whole host of other activities. Is there a risk if we move this? Is there a financial, operational, reputational risk, whatever it is, if we move something out because we need to deprioritize? And I realize I'm moving a little quickly, but I want to make sure we have time for Q&A here. And then as you're embedding and working on building that kind of culture of change and transformation, right? It's always helpful to have some sort of, strategic comms roadmap, or kind of some key messages that can be built into, different types of engagement vehicles, whether it's, the corporate communications that come out, reinforcing that, we're evolving, we're changing, we're building a culture of continuous improvement. Having leaders cascade messages, whether they're, talking points or whatnot in team meetings, so that that information gets shared with employees and they're reminded of those messages, including information in town halls and podcasts and videos, reinforcing and performance management processes, and organizational core competencies. So how do you kind of infiltrate that language and begin to building that culture of, change and transformation into that journey that, you want to be on as you continue to evolve and grow. And then, as I mentioned a little bit, around building a culture open to new ideas, removing that we've always done it this way, building trust, encouraging idea generation, recognizing and rewarding employees who exhibit adaptable and flexible behaviors, right? Change is hard for people, but as you kind of build that into the organization that, this is how we work now, this is our new normal, recognizing employees who, who are able to do that, and using them as, a sounding board for others, or, a buddy system or a mentor system or something like that. And then lastly, I always like to talk about is, just keep moving forward with purpose, right? So I think the common theme through change and adaptability is like moving forward and generating that, need for change and ensuring there's leadership engagement, alignment, embedding in messaging, building a culture of trust and openness. And I think there's one stat that I also wanted to share that, 70% of initiatives in organizations don't succeed. And like the number one reason is due to lack of helping employees through the change. And two of those biggest variables are around the leadership alignment piece. So if your leaders aren't aligned in terms of what needs to happen and why it needs to happen, you can't expect the employees to understand and be bought into the solution as well. And then next is that stakeholder engagement piece. So when you're trying to roll out a change in your organization or thinking about it, one of the things I always put together and coach my team on is putting together a stakeholder engagement, map, list, whatever you want to call it, and starting kind of more macro and then getting down to like the individual level as you need to. But thinking about the change and thinking about, how is this going to impact whether it's operations or my counterparts in HR or my counterparts in procurement or marketing, like who needs to know something? Why do they need to know? How are they impacted from like a high, medium, and low level? And when do I need to engage them? The last thing you want is, something to go live, or you need some partnership with someone and you're, sending them an email or knocking on their door at the 11th hour, right? That doesn't work. It's, thinking ahead of who's impacted and how are they part of this journey and how do we bring them along on, where that end goal is and, what needs to happen for our, business outcomes to be achieved. So, in a nutshell, just, keep trying to reinforce that kind of need for change, that open and trusting environment where people can share feedback and feedback is appreciated, embedded in messaging, and, you can start to kind of build that culture of change, which helps to build that resiliency and adaptability. So with that, I'd like to just, thank everyone for your time, and I will turn it back over to Kayla for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Renee, and Abel and Erik as well for sharing kind of how we can move from a theoretical framework of adaptive organizations into a really practical one. So to the audience who's still here, it looks like a few people had to jump off after the lunch hour, which is okay. But if those are of you who are still here, if you want to jump on camera, since we're all together now, feel free to do that. Certainly, if you're not in a position or not comfortable, we won't make you do that. We are going to spend a few minutes addressing the questions that you submitted during registration, and I will also make sure to leave some time for you to address anything that came up today. So the first question we're going to go with is about the development and implementation of building adaptable organizations, which is, what does a playbook look like for initiating adaptability and resilience in an organization? And I will let whoever wants can start with that one.
I'm happy to jump in. I think that, there's a couple ways you can think about, developing a playbook. I always say there isn't a one size solution to change and, transformations that happen. So I don't think that necessarily you can kind of pull off a playbook off a shelf and say, this is going to work in every scenario, or this is how we're going to roll this out, or this is how we're going to transform. But there are some of those core elements that I mentioned in my presentation around, leadership alignment, stakeholder engagement, building that culture of trust, incorporating it into performance management reviews that can kind of help get the organization to that framework. But I wouldn't necessarily say that there's a one size fits all kind of adaptability framework. I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to help kind of build the business case and drive for change, right? Even when I started in Cushman just a couple of years ago, it'll be 3 years in January, we didn't have an organizational change management function. We didn't have any, playbooks or tools or anything like that. It was kind of bespoke processes across the org, but I built a business case for, how this is going to help our organization having consistent processes and structures around managing change. Now, every change is different. People are impacted differently, but at least there's kind of a consistent approach so that leaders do know, okay, this is how we're going to move our employees through the organization. We'll pull different levers as needed, whether there's, I think there was a question that also came up, Kayla, that I'll just quickly touch on here around, measuring readiness for change also. That can be done in different ways. That can be done, whether it's like pre-go live, you can measure at go live, post go live. Recently, I rolled out a kind of a gamification tool also that served as a training vehicle, but also a measurement vehicle for, where are employees at, pre-go live, where are they 10 days into, the transformation. There's different ways that, you can kind of measure readiness for change, even if it's a quick, 5-item survey via MS Forms. I understand why we're changing. I've received sufficient communication about this. I know where to go for questions. Here's where some of my concerns are, right? It doesn't have to be, complicated and elaborate. I think that's, one thing, because, you could lose people when you do, overly complicated change management, but something simple where it's relatable and you can get a pulse check of, are people ready? Where are some of the, I always say, tell me about the pothole before I drive into it. Like, what are some of those, areas of resistance that I might face that I'm not even thinking about? I've done, an impact assessment all day long, different groups validated, but, like we were talking about, Erik, about, at the end of the day, it's what does the customer see? And there might be someone sitting in the UK or in Asia Pacific who said, we don't do it that way here. And it's knowing about that before you implement or roll something out to make your initiative even stronger.
Yeah, and Kayla, I totally agree, Renee, and maybe the couple points I might add are good news, bad news. There's a lot of information out there. Like it's almost it's cumbersome, right? So how do you have the right people and systems to be able to acquire the right information to turn it into knowledge? And then do you have the right governance structure to make efficient decisions? And then, all the great stuff that Renee had mentioned in terms of, how do you have the right cultural elements that can turn those key decisions into action? And again, there's a lot of tough stuff in there, but again, I think having the ability to turn information into decisions and then make the tough decisions on what are you not going to do, because any decision you make to do means there's 99 things that you're not going to do. And that's almost the tougher part.
Thank you both for sharing your insights on that. I have one more question that I will ask based on a few things that were submitted. And the idea is basically, how do you build and sustain adaptability when there's abrupt changes in policymaking, really, and regulation at the highest level? So in other words, when there's big macro changes and those changes really impact an industry, how do you plan for those things, and how do you adapt to those changes?
Yeah, Renee, you want to go first again, or
you go for it, Erik. I think this is a lot in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, unfortunately, like I said, there's a lot more not in our control than in our control. And the good news is that, there's a lot to learn about in history. So, cycles have happened before. And so I think there's a lot of good learnings that can happen when you pay attention to what has happened in the past. And I think, whether that's rate increases or, wars overseas in Ukraine, how might that influence the environment? What is the Fed likely going to do when you have out of control inflation? We know that the biggest tool in their toolbox is to raise rates. And what is that going to do to our industry in terms of mortgage rates? And what is the consumer going to do? And what should we do with our balance sheet? And so, again, I think you all said it in terms of balance. I think there's a lot of things that you can do looking to the past, but being flexible and agile enough in the structure of your organization and decision-making matrix that you can kind of take your best guess, but also be prepared to be adaptive. And that's a tough balance, but I think that's the right answer.
Erik, I'll actually build on something you touched on too in your presentation about, diversification. You mentioned that, your organization is moving into that, rental space. And our organization, within the past couple of years has also moved into kind of that multifamily residential space as well, right? So it's not just solely commercial real estate space and I think you need to be thinking about, where else can I be playing? What else can I be doing to diversify the portfolio so that as one area of the business kind of slows down, right? In our case, it's like the capital market space as interest rates increase. I mean, you see it too. There's not as many transactions being made, but then there's also, different areas of the business that can try to absorb some of those, ebbs and flows that happen naturally in a cyclical way.
Yeah, and for whatever it's worth, and thanks for bringing that up, Renee. For whatever it's worth, maybe I'll just share 30 seconds on that decision-making matrix. It's not, when we wanted to diversify, it wasn't we're going to go start building computers or software. It's what do we do on a daily basis that is part of our core competence that we're really good at, that can expose ourselves to a completely different segment. And so, we buy land, we entitle land, we develop land, and we build homes. We're just going to do it in a different consumer segment. So it really, from a risk profile standpoint, wasn't that large.
Yep.
Abel, you're on mute. Were you trying to talk?
Thank you, Kayla. You saved my life. So one thing that I noticed in my professional experience is that when a company is trying to make itself adaptable, I think that there are two reactions. One is that you're reacting to external environments, such as, just interest rates, just macro issues. The other one is that you're trying to make sure that your company internally is basically adaptable. I think the ROI that you get from moving internally, because that is very idiosyncratic. Whereas, just when you look at externally, there is a huge amount of competition on that score. So I think that in terms of making the company adaptable and reacting to change, I would prioritize micro idiosyncratic changes within your company more profitable, more impactful than, just that focusing on how you react, for example, to inflation.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think one of the questions came through is, maybe taking a counter position is what's the cost of being adaptable? And I think the cost is, a lot of people can't adapt and they're going to choose a different company. They're going to choose a different industry perhaps, but the fact of the matter is that's why I like that quote so much. If you don't like change, you're going to like your relevance less. And I would rather our company be around and make some difficult decisions than not. And so, yeah, totally agree. And it's not easy. It is the most difficult thing that I think everybody has said today.
Great. Thank you all for those answers. I did want to we have just about 10 minutes scheduled left. We certainly have more questions that we can go through, but wanted to give the audience here a chance to ask anything that might have come up during the presentation. So those of you who are still with us, if you want, you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question or drop it in the chat and I can see it that way, but I'll give 30 seconds to see if anyone had anything. Don't all jump at once.
Kayla, I just had more of a comment really pertaining to something that Erik had mentioned during his talk on, let's say, the example of, years ago where in the example of, let's say, Blockbuster having this chance to put a bid in on a small startup like a Netflix back then, and that it, really, when you think about it, it was the decision not to, which is a decision. Oftentimes think of decisions as some positive outcome when also sometimes it's those acquisitions that aren't made. And it reminds me of also too the similar story on, let's say, right now, a real titan of industry, Apple Computers, and as successful as they've been in the last decade, one of the decisions they didn't make was in the last 6 or 7 years when Elon Musk was struggling at Tesla, not taking the story goes that there was a phone call, there was an attempt by Elon Musk to make a phone call to Apple Computers for a lifeline, buy our company because we're struggling. This is a time where Tesla had no cash flows or negative cash flows, and stock price was not performing well. And so the thought was, well, wouldn't there be some synergy created between Apple Computers acquiring Tesla? And the story goes that the phone call was never, no meeting was even scheduled on Tim Cook's end with Elon Musk. And so as a shareholder, you think, well, as successful as Apple Computers has been, imagine if you had acquired Tesla at $50 billion, which would have been a drop in the bucket for Apple 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And then now the value at maybe 600 billion or 700 billion, how much more value would have been created for shareholders? And it's just one of these examples of decisions that aren't made that are, it's really hard to evaluate those. Whereas you can always evaluate, the decisions that are made because they occurred, and then there's some, you can evaluate what happened to profitability afterwards, but it's those decisions that aren't made that are hard to detect. And kind of tied into Erik's story, then even broader on this idea of, let's say, decision making in this uncertain environment. The concern I have is just that there's the example of also another titan of industry. Well, it was a titan of industry a year ago, Facebook, or now it's Metaverse or Meta. And a year ago they had a market cap pushing $1 trillion. Now with a 75% decrease in just a 1-year time period, where investors really seem to be punishing them for these massive capital expenditures in the metaverse, something in the neighborhood of like $10 billion a year projected for the next 10 years, in this highly speculative, new technology. Where when I asked, and I was in my financial accounting course in the last week or two, I was polling my 18, 19, 20-year-old undergraduate students, have any of you been in the metaverse? And I would think this is the target demographic of these kind of ideas, and they're all looking around like, no, I've heard about it the same way you have, Professor Massel, but I haven't delved into it. And simultaneously, you've got this organization, a real heavyweight. A top 5 most valuable company in the world. Well, certainly in the U.S. economy a year ago, making this massive investment and just destroying shareholder value in such a short period of time. It's just really astonishing to me, and it just makes me think, for organizations really across the spectrum, how do they invest their capital in this era? And here's a prime example of a company that really went, they're going big in an area and just getting punished for it severely. And it's a bit of an extreme example, but even for those companies in the middle, as they make these capital expenditures in a very uncertain future, it just seems like they're really, I think it's going to be big trouble for innovation in the future, where companies are fearful of making these investments because they don't know what the future holds.
Yeah. No, thanks, Norman. And I would tell you something that we experience is a very healthy, there was a lot of good stuff in there. A healthy tension around surviving the day and putting yourself in the future, right? So we've got, a lot of folks in our organization that are literally entrenched in the day and fighting the day and focus on the day, and have a very difficult time because of kind of putting themselves 3 to 4 years out from now, where that's kind of my job, is engaging with the boards, kind of painting the picture and doing a lot of pre-mortems to basically say, if this happens, this is what likely the company is going to look like. And that's a very good tension to have in a company, to say, you can't just put yourself 3 or 4 years out from today if you ignore today, because you're not going to get there. And I think if you only focus on today, you're not going to have a future and you're going to be irrelevant. So I would just tell you, from a structural standpoint and intended tension, I think having near-term and long-term and focused on those pre-mortem tools is really important. And then I don't know, it's one of the words that I think Abel used in our prep, but I don't know that really came out today, was ambidextrous. And I would tell you that there's a lot of books written on it. And to me, it's, again, how do you keep the mothership, the core going, but at the same time be brave enough to carve out a segment to go chase something that's brave and bold to create the future for you. And I would tell you that's kind of what we did in one very small, humble example of the build to rent segment. Completely new segment, completely new team, carved them out, said, you guys go focus on this, build the future for us, and we'll keep the mothership going. So yeah, great comments.
I think it is since Business Leadership Hub, Center for Risk Management, Executive Education, they're part of an educational system. I think it is important to talk to say something about whether universities or particular business schools are adaptable. I think we wonder a lot that we are offering the same programs with the same concepts, and the world is changing around us very, very rapidly. I mean, putting somebody in a 2-year MBA program, by the time that they graduate, many of the things that they learned in the first quarter is probably not relevant. And so the question is that there is a lot of room in the higher education to start thinking adaptively. And they have been resisting that significantly. And I think part of the problem that they have been resisting has been the flow of enrollment. The flow of enrollment has continued, and that sort of slowed down the incentive to be adaptable. I was actually talking to a colleague, and I say, you know, we have MBA programs 2 years, 1.5 year, and 1 year. That is as low as in terms of period it goes. Is there room for a 6 months MBA program that actually delivers the same learning objectives? And I mean, does it really make sense to put a group of people to think about that? So you can go to school for 6 months, your opportunity cost is really low, your tuition is really low. And if we could actually make sure that what you learn in that 6 months exactly provide the same dimension of knowledge that an employer requires from somebody with a graduate management degree. I think that is something that it will come. And the first business school that, you know, just launches that, I think that they capture a significant amount of market by doing so.
Yeah, it's interesting. And you know, exiting my MBA, to your point, I think, Abel, if you really said, okay, what was the 80% of the key learnings, and can that be accomplished in 20% of the time? Perhaps, right?
Yeah, perhaps. That's true. Of course, remember that as you were talking about balancing it, if you do that, the revenues of universities are going to go down significantly. So the mothership may sink. So that's, I guess, that's really the issue.
Well, on that note, I think I will go ahead and wrap up the discussion for today. Thank you again, Renee and Erik and Abel, for sharing everything that you did. It was all very insightful and very helpful. And thank you to those of you who hung on till the very end and didn't let Friday afternoon get the better of you. We appreciate you being here and joining us today. We're going to go ahead and end the discussion. Thank you again.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Bye.